good evening, listeners. And I say good evening because I find it vague enough to be used for afternoon through the nighttime. If you're listening to our podcast in the morning hours, then I both admire and resent your sense of productivity. Regardless of the time of day, welcome to our interview series on the Parlay Online magazine. My name is Bradley Rist, and today I will be helping you, dear listener, explore the depths of poetry and hopefully make it a little less intimidating and a little more enjoyable. On this episode, I'm very honored to speak with Mr. Thomas Goff as we begin to discuss his poem, Spacewalk. Thanks for coming in, Tom. Would you like to introduce yourself or preface any experience or literary accomplishments to the reader?
Okay. I've worked in the Los Rios district since at least 1989, on and off, and I worked at American River College, where, in fact, I was one of the editors on the literary magazine over there for a while. And since 2006, I've been working in the Folsom Lake College Reading and Writing Center as an instructional assistant. Okay. And one of the nice things I get to do sometimes is introduce poetry. So
fantastic. Yeah, American River College has a really nice literary magazine.
Oh, do they ever?
Yeah, that's our main competitor over there.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're over here with us and helping out our podcast. So, Spacewalk. This is one of the poems that I think we, on the poetry department, all really enjoyed on first read. And I'm actually a little embarrassed to admit that many of us didn't realize that it was a sonnet until much later on in the analysis stages. We simply just enjoyed the words and the rhythm of it all.
Well, maybe that's the intent of behind form, not to be there but not call attention to itself.
I like that, yeah.
So
I really, honestly, I think that your the rhythm and the pacing of reading it aloud is really satisfying for me, and I think for most of the poetry department would also agree with that. Oh, actually, the first thing that I noticed was when I was reading it was when I discovered that it was a sonnet, that is. I was testing out like iambic pentameter, right? Right. That's the Shakespearean strategy. And so I'm an amateur poet, I'll say.
Oh, okay.
But I know a little bit about that. And so I was testing it out, and one of my poetry staff friends was laughing at me, and they thought, there's no way that iambic pentameter would show up in a student-run magazine. It was such a far-fetched idea.
Oh.
And then I came across in the first two lines. Then I was curious how it starts to shift in this third line here. You have, in Spacewalk, first two lines, frustrated by the deep space emptiness of campus and the hours away from you, both hit that ba-ba, ba-ba, ba-ba.
That's right.
And the 10-syllable count. And then in this third line, I wonder, will my anxiety progress, has 11 syllables, right?
It does. So poets have explained that variously. So they will say this is an iambic pentameter rhythm with I don't know the I can't recall the technical term here, but with a little triplet rhythm thrown in, just to vary. I think Robert Frost used to say that the meter of the poem, whether it's iambic pentameter or trochaic tetrameter or whatever you might have, that's the ground rhythm, but it's like a steady beat over which the improviser can improvise and vary the melodic line somewhat.
So you keep the rhythm going without being too strict to the format? Really?
That's right.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Because too much iambic pentameter, even though it seems to be a tendency in English, is like anything done too much, a little monotonous.
Right. Yeah, monotonous will get repetitive. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, that makes perfect sense, since I absolutely adore the rhythm of reading this. So I'm glad that that's pointed out. Apart from the meaning of the poem, which is always interpretational, well, what would you say about the meaning of this poem?
Well, it goes back a ways. So people of my generation probably at some time in their lives used to have an old stack of National Geographics with the yellow borders on the cover, and probably in boxes sometimes in the garage, and they're collecting mold and dust and Lord knows what.
I think I've seen some of those at the doctor's office.
Yeah, preferably without the mold.
Yeah.
But but I've always remembered when they covered the initial space explorations. So I think I used to have issues going as far back as the Mercury program, and then Spacewalk in this instance would go back all the way to the Gemini program, where 2 astronauts were in a single capsule, kind of a duplex capsule. And little by little, they started experimenting with the spacewalk. And the spacewalk was always done with some kind of self-propulsion and a safety device. It was partly their oxygen source, but it was also their tether to the spaceship, so that if anything went wrong, they could get reeled back in.
So you're comparing that, like, self-reliance or self-propulsion and the tether, and that's becoming a metaphor for your relationship with Nora, that is?
A kind of conundrum of freedom and restraint.
I see. Okay, that's super interesting. What about the light that's used, that's referenced throughout, the motion sensor, the energy saving, and the light dispenser?
And so, inevitably, in a poem, some of it is free association. So at the time I was writing it, I was thinking about how the lights go on and off in the Reading and Writing Center at Folsom Lake College. If you don't move around.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So in this poem, I guess the woman spoken to is either herself a source of light or the source of the motion that turns the lights on again.
Okay. That's super interesting. See, I interpreted it as like you coming home and there being like a motion sensor at the house, or Nora is coming home and the motion sensor indicates like her arrival.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, well, we've just started. We installed an alarm sometime in recent years, so I guess we decided against the motion sensor, but there was one if we wanted it.
Yeah. Is that connected all to the like of campus and the emptiness and gem in here?
Yeah. When I think about the emptiness of campus, I think back to maybe 2008 when the wildfires were at their worst, and so the motion sensor would stop seeing motion. The room would go dark, and we've got a wonderful view out the Reading and Writing Center window, but that view wasn't to be had when there was all that smoke. So it was like an eclipse.
I see. Oh my gosh, that's really good imagery. And what about the use of umbilical? I thought that was very interesting.
Well, umbilical oxygen cord. Well, of course, the baby is born with the umbilical cord still attached. But I believe the Gemini astronauts even called it the umbilical cord.
Okay, yeah, because that is their lifeline.
Yes, it was their lifeline, exactly.
Okay, that's super interesting. Any notes on the capitalization of deep space and light dispenser? I thought those stood out since light dispenser.
Deep space. I don't know whether that goes back to, maybe that goes back to one of those Star Trek franchises. Wasn't it Deep Space Nine?
That could be, yeah.
That might be what was playing through my head. And I guess, of course, if you're going to have deep space capitalized, then you get to light dispenser. And either of those, when you capitalize them, they take on a little bit of persona, maybe a supernatural persona.
Okay, yeah, I see that. And they are like almost opposites in a way. It's really interesting. Okay. When did you write this, may I ask?
A couple weeks ago, I think.
Weeks ago? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Really a lovely poem. I remember us being at first irritated. We hadn't understood that it was a sonnet at the time. The word Bach, how it stood out so much, how it was such a hard finish on that line. And we were so irritated by it because we just loved the flow of the rest of the poem. And then as soon as we figured out that it was a sonnet and there was rhyme scheme that was happening, it was like, oh my gosh, we feel so silly.
Well, not silly, I guess. But I guess if the movement has been too flowing, too liquid, every so often there has to be you know how a DJ can imitate what used to be the record skip.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe that's what that's doing there.
It did feel like that. Was there any other notes that you wanted to add to this poem? Any other context?
I'm thinking that would probably be enough for the reader.
Okay, well, I hope that our listeners have a better understanding of this poem and are able to access poetry more and enjoy it.
All righty. Thank you for having me.
Of course.